welcome to How to Win the Lottery, Season 2, bonus episode, Devil House by John Darnielle. I'm Joey Lewandowski.
I am Shreds.
Welcome to a bonus episode. Last week we had Secret History come out. This upcoming week we have... What book do we do after Secret History? Probably a short one. Was it Floriegi?
It may have been Floor.
SDOD coming out next week, but...
Sadad.
In between, we have a new release. This is not really a campus novel, though there are students in the novel. Over the last 2 years, I've been reading more than I have.
Yep.
But I still feel like I'm not reading new stuff. Because I feel like I have newer stuff.
You mean stuff that's coming out?
New releases, yeah.
Okay.
Whereas, like, with movies or video games or whatever, I'm just like, oh, that's a new thing. I'm going to play that. I'm going to watch that, whatever. TV shows.
Yeah.
So I feel like, not that I'm caught up, but because we sort of have like a rhythm and a cadence for the podcast, there's more new releases that I'm looking forward to this year. And so I feel like this will be a nice way to do some bonus episodes for the pod. This book came out 2 months ago, a month and a half ago or whatever, but, still relatively new, still relatively zeitgeisty.
I think very few people read a new book within a month of it's coming out, because a lot of people take longer than a month to read a book anyway. So I think you're within the right to say this is a new book.
It's not even a short book either. It's like 405 pages.
Yeah, it's also it's a slow moving book. It sort of crawls along.
I read the first 70 pages of this on a flight about a month ago, and then I got distracted by the other books we were doing with the podcast, and I read the last 240 pages in the last 3 days.
Wow. Yeah, I started reading it on February 11th.
Yeah, I started the book before you, and I was like, I'm pretty far into it, and then you finished the book basically before I picked it up again.
Yeah, and it's been a while since I've read it, so you're going to have to do most of the heavy lifting with regards to content here.
Oh, boy.
Because I've read, 7 books or something like that.
What is that?
Well, I've read at least one more for the podcast, specifically, since I finished this.
This is John Darnielle's third novel, right?
Fourth?
Well,
he has the Masters of Reality, which is a 33 and a third.
About Metallica?
No, about Black Sabbath.
Oh, yeah. Shit.
Yeah.
All right, gotta start the podcast.
Wow, you are a fucking nerd.
I was thinking Master of Puppets.
Yeah, sure. Which is a good album.
Mm-hmm.
It's not Master of Reality. But, right. So he wrote that, which those...
Wait, I'm a nerd because I got them wrong?
Yeah, because Black Sabbath is cool.
Okay.
And nerds are squares.
Fair.
You are consistently wrong about nerd stuff, because you always call me a nerd, and I am clearly not. I'm the opposite of a nerd.
I'm plagued by ennui.
Yeah, you're plagued by other stuff too. That's for sure.
So he wrote 4 novels. 33 1/3 is not a novel.
Okay, yeah, that's what I want to talk about. So normally 33 1/3 is works of criticism. Written from a journalistic point of view.
About a particular album.
And Darnielle's 33 1/3 is that, but it's also narrative. It is a story about a kid who gets sent to a lock treatment facility, and while he's there, his therapist is asking him to write about things that he loves. So one of the things that he decides to write about is Masters of Reality. And then a bunch of other stuff happens, and the novel is narrated from his adult perspective after having found that notebook again.
Did he write this before Wolf and White Van?
Yes.
And then he wrote Universal Harvester?
Yes.
And A Devil House?
Yes.
That 33 1/3 sounds good.
It's really good.
I don't think I've read any of those. I think I've talked maybe about, there's the boss fight battle series that's kind of like that for video games, where it's people writing about a specific video game. And
yeah, that's the type you would read those books if you are a nerd.
You got me. I never said that I wasn't a nerd. I just said you were.
Yeah, right.
Anyway.
So you're wrong on half of those.
So his fourth novel.
Yeah.
3.5, 4, whatever. But I've read 3 of them. You read all 4.
Mm-hmm.
Where does this rank for you? Because we've talked. The reason I bring it up is because I think we've mentioned multiple times on the podcast Darnielle, because I feel like he's another author that I knew of The Mountain Goats. I never really listened to The Mountain Goats before we were friends, and I didn't know he was an author. And so he's one of the people that, one of my probably favorite authors, of the 5, maybe 5 favorite that you've brought to me. He's in there because he's a great writer.
So what are you asking?
Where does it rank for you among the 4?
It's really hard to say.
Because they're all kind of, at least the 3 that I've read are of a type.
Yeah, and what type is that? Explain it.
Somber and serious and slow moving and melancholic, but also like optimistic in a way.
Life affirming.
Yeah.
But also they tend to revolve around teenagers who are in situations where maybe it feels like the world has turned on them in some way, and they're leaning on counterculture things, whether that be heavy metal or horror movies or in this case
kind of those too.
Yeah, well, this one is very specifically leaning into like this sort of semiotics of
true crime
and satanic panic specifically.
Yeah. So what is Devil House about?
Devil House is about a true crime writer who is moving into a house where double homicide has taken place.
Years earlier. Decades earlier. And he is there to construct a new true crime novel. And while there, like, we get insight into his other works and ideas about story and narrative. So a lot of like what this book is about is the structure, which is how would you say it's structured? So it's structured. I texted you. The only book that I've read that's like this is Cloud Atlas, which I think is not entirely dissimilar in style or structure, or the physical structure is the same, but also like Cloud Atlas is all about the interconnectivity of all things. And I think that there's that at play here too.
Yeah. There's a difference in scale.
For sure. Because that spans centuries and spans 25 or 30 years.
Continents.
Like yeah. Space, whatever. Yeah. It's 7 chapters. And the first and the last are from the writer's perspective, although it changes.
Well, yeah, the last one is from his childhood friend's perspective. But he's the main character.
He's the main character. The second and the sixth are about this woman. No, that's not true. Is it? Yeah, it is. The second and the sixth, again, changes perspective, but it's about the white witch, who was a school teacher who had her apartment broken into and was assaulted, and she defended herself, but kind of went extreme, stabbed these kids like 37 times, chopped up their bodies, tried to dispose of it, got caught. So that's chapter 2, and then chapter 6 is a letter that the writer receives from the mother of one of the kids.
Yeah.
Chapters 3 and 6 are about the titular Devil House.
3 and 5.
3 and 5. Sorry. Who's the numbers guy here? You're the numbers guy here.
That's right, yeah.
3 and 5 are about...
the reader should know that I got a perfect score on my math SATs, while Joey, I think, maybe didn't even take the SATs, and he's a bit of a dummy. Let's keep going. Let's roll this along before you try to fact check any of that.
3 and 5 are about the titular Devil House, and which is the house that the writer is living in now, was like an adult film shop, Monster Adult X or something, porn store that went out of business, and these kids kind of not moved in, but like used that as a like treehouse basically, and drew a bunch of devil imagery, and then the slumlord who was selling it and the guy who was going to buy it got murdered while visiting there. And then the middle 20 pages are wildly different apparently on Kindle than it is in the actual physical book, where it's like old English, like King Arthur shit.
Well, I meant the font is old English.
Yes, it's written in English.
Yeah.
It's
written in like a sort of pidgin version of like early modern English,
which kind of makes sense as you read it in the middle of this book, and then really kind of makes sense if you... I think that's the benefit to me reading most of the book this week. It's like that was still fresh in my brain.
Yeah.
Like if I read this over the course of a month, I'd be like, castles? I don't understand.
Yeah, it's kind of fuzzy to me. It's a little murky in the background. That's why.
So.
You're here to do the heavy lifting with that stuff.
All right, here we go. All right. I got nothing.
So what let's see. What did you like about this book or find moving or what?
Well, I want to ask you first, because you described it when you finished it, and I was maybe like 100 pages in. You said it's a beautiful book.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's a beautiful book? Because I feel like from the outset, a book about true crime and murder and sort of the outcasts of society, beautiful and beauty is not necessarily the phrase or the descriptor you would pair with that.
Yeah, I think especially once you get toward the very end of the book, it starts asking you for maybe an uncommon empathy. And
how do you mean that?
Empathy for people in our world that are often leaned away from, that we pass by and don't think about their plights or are willing to believe that their plights are somehow self-caused. And the book asks us to consider them as human beings who have a right to their spaces and to, like, they may be unhoused or they may be indigent or however you want to phrase that, but they deserve the rights that everyone else deserves, which should feel like an common and easy thing, but I think it's often not. And the book predecesses all of that with a sympathy for teenagers that are like that. Teenagers that are often left aside in society and are often, beleaguered by things like unsafe homes and unsafe schools and a world that seems to be against them at every turn. So a lot of it is about finding a safe place, a place that's yours, and how that place can be such a deep comfort when it's there, and then when it gets taken away from you, what happens?
Yeah. What I think is interesting, I think a lot of people don't take the time to think about, is that over the last, I think probably for decades now, but especially over the last 5 or 10 years, I think largely due to Netflix, true crime has become a lot of people's favorite thing, and I would say specifically white women's kind of favorite thing.
Yeah, and the ID channel or whatever that is.
Yeah, and Nancy Grace.
And Nancy Grace, right, who's a monster.
Like the Jean-Benet Ramsey stuff and, Lacey Peterson and all these where it's like a pretty woman is missing or murdered and it becomes headlines. And I think there's a tendency to, especially when you compulsively consume anything, but this in particular, you forget that these are people. And I think that the novel subverts the writer in a way that we'll get to at the end, but you don't think about when you watch a thing or read a thing or follow a story oh yeah, that kid's mom was in a terrible situation and she's a person and she'll forever be remembered as the mother of the kid who broke into, because there's even thing in this novel, the true crime book that he writes about the White Witch, the teacher who murders the kids and gets arrested, becomes a movie and it becomes this phenomenon or whatever. And the mom and the writer agree that the story is about the teacher. This happens to her. She's the victim, but also she's not the only victim. The son is the victim, but also the mom's a victim because her life is irrevocably changed too. And so I think that there's a tendency to be oh my God, can you believe she snapped and she killed you? She's right. Whatever. But there's the ripple effect. And I feel this kind of, to some extent, condemns true crime. And it's just we're, this is not something we should glorify.
It condemns rubbernecking. And I, the way what you just said was put to me in a graduate class was,
so you're saying what I said, but smarter?
Well, I don't,
yes.
I don't think smarter, but condensed into a single sentence is that if you tell enough of anybody's story, they become a sympathetic character.
Sure.
It's easy to say that. That's a really hard thing to practice, right? We have a difficult time thinking of people who, especially people who are murderers, right? Remember, when you think of Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris's mothers or fathers or whatever, we don't think of them, but they knew those kids when they were babies, right? They knew those kids as people who loved ice cream and wanted to go to Chuck E. Cheese and loved cartoons.
I don't know if I highlighted it because I didn't take notes, but I highlighted a bunch of things. But there's a passage that is in chapter 6, which is the back half of the White Witch, which is her a lot of it is just this like 10-page letter that she writes to the author, and he's kind of reading through it or whatever.
Well, the implication in the book is that the letter is like hundreds of pages.
Oh, for some reason I thought 10, but like it's very long.
It came inside
Oh, right, yes,
a package
yes.
that's like,
She's been writing for 30 years or something.
yeah, revising. She sends it out. And she can't find him, so it gets sent back to her, and she spends years revising it and sending it out again.
But she says something along the lines of like, because the cops call her in for not questioning, but like just to talk to her.
Mm-hmm.
And like, is this your son's necklace? And she like realizes it's his, and like an evidence bag, and she screams and screams and screams. And then her abusive husband is like on the way there. This is the author speaking. How could I know what it was like for a teenage girl to have a baby boy and to do her best all her life for her child, but to never be good enough, never be strong enough, never be smart enough, and then to see her son grow into a teenager and begin to slip away in a hope you don't want to say pray, you know better, that he could at least get out on his own and find a way for himself. And then it goes on to say something like, that person you put so much time into is just gone, and then like, what are you, like, the person you were living for, I think is the phrase they use, you're done. So like, she was like tolerating this abusive relationship with her husband for the son, and now the son is gone. Yeah. And it's like, nobody cares about her because she's not in the story.
Right. And probably, as happens with parents in these circumstances, I think of, for example, the mother of the boy that killed all those people in Newtown, right? That mother has been demonized because he stole her guns. And even though I think he murdered her as well, but it's still, people are still like, you know, she's the villain here. She's one of the villains here. But there's something really that I found really, really moving that is like, I think, a turning point in the novel for me from that section, which is over and over again in that section. She says to him, because he wrote that story, she says, but how could you know that? How could you possibly know? You could never know what it's like to be me. You could never know what it was like to be Jesse. How could you know what it's like to be this abused boy, et cetera, et cetera? How could you know what it's like to be the mother of an, you know, but you couldn't put yourself in my shoes? So over and over again, she says that. And then when we get towards the end, she is like, I don't remember the exact words here, but there's like this really cynical moment where she's like, blames Gene Cupp, the other kid that's not Jesse. And she, like, all of her empathy is on her and her son. Like, she feels victimized by this circumstance, and she feels that her son has been victimized by this circumstance. And she knows Gene Cupp a little bit because she reflects on how he was nice to her. He was like a charming presence in their house and stuff like that. But she's willing to.
And she also reminds her of when she fell in love with her husband. Okay. Like, as the rebellious kind of
which could be a reason why she's so angry at him too, because he represents, he's a symbol of this. But she shifts blame to him and blames her son's death and the White Witch stuff on Gene, without giving him the empathy that she's asking of everyone else for herself and her son. And it just shows that, like, in all of these circumstances, in every true crime circumstance, we're blinded by context. We're blinded by our own personal interest in it. We're blinded by all of the context that the media surrounds us with. I think, like, the thing that I think of all the time with this, it's like, honestly, never that far from my head, is O.J. Simpson, because nobody ever talks about Ron Goldman. Yeah. Like, like, sometimes you might talk about Nicole Brown Simpson because she has OJ's name and there's that history there. But, like, Ron Goldman is not an interesting character. I would guess that most people who are familiar with OJ don't even know who Ron Goldman is, wouldn't know the name, wouldn't recognize it.
And honestly, now they might most know the name for, like, the legal battles after the fact that are just about, like, recouping the lawyer fees and stuff like that, right? So, like, it becomes a copy of a copy of a copy. I don't know if this was the quote that you were referring to, but it ends with this thing I have highlighted: Jesse drifting into Gene's orbit, but so lonely that anyone who showed him kindness became his favorite person in the world, so hungry for friendship that he was a sitting duck for a boy like Gene Cupp.
Yeah, that's exactly it. What does a boy like Gene Cupp mean? If like Jesse, like, if you had deployed that exact phrasing, a boy like Jesse, the response to that would be like, well, we don't have the whole context for what a boy like Jesse is. What makes a boy like Jesse? How does a boy like Jesse happen? Yep. Right? And the answer is all of the horrific stuff that she's already told us about abuse and about his detachment from the family because he's afraid, and all of these things. It also makes me think about this thing that I think we'll probably end up reading for a module in the future, because it's one of my favorite things written in the last, I don't know how long, but it's a graphic
180 years.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things that I've read in the last 180 years of my life. It's a graphic novel by Durf Backdurf called My Friend Dahmer, which is
a movie.
Yeah, did you see that movie?
No.
I didn't see the movie either. But it's written by a guy who was a childhood friend of Jeffrey Dahmer, and it walks you through Jeffrey Dahmer in high school.
I did see the movie.
It walks you through Jeffrey Dahmer in high school, and it's heartbreaking because it shows you, like, this is a person that was incredibly sick, a person that could have been helped at any moment. The people in his orbit that could have helped him just weren't paying attention.
I did not like that movie.
Yeah.
My snarky review on Letterboxd is serial killers are people too, apparently. Like, I feel like the movie probably did not do an effective job of, like, but that's the same thing, right? It's just like they're trying to humanize a noteworthy, famous serial killer.
Yeah, and the point is maybe that you shouldn't need to humanize him because he is human, right? He's been monsterized by his acts, sure. Like, he's definitely guilty of those crimes. He's definitely did terrible things. But, we're a community, and you are responsible for the people around you, and you are responsible for helping people when they need help. Otherwise, how can any of us get better, right?
I think what's particularly interesting about Devil House is in the true crime of it all. I feel like the Devil House stuff itself is not especially satisfying.
Okay.
And I think part of that is because it's the novel. It's there's the twist at the end. I think part of it is that it's the narrative that he's kind of researching and writing now, so it's not whatever. And I think everything you were just talking about with the White Witch and also the Dahmer and like the human element of it is, I think, more affecting in the White Witch stuff. I think the 2 and 6, I think, is more. There's more pathos, maybe, I think, or different kinds.
Well, I think so too, because I think she,
the mom,
Jana, gives him the perspective that is necessary for him to alter the story in the way that he ultimately does, which is, now we're getting toward the end of the book, and I don't think we talked about this yet, but ultimately what the story ends up being.
Right, which I think this is why it explains why Devil House sort of feels, or didn't feel satisfying to me, and felt like it was missing something, is because we find out in the final, 10 pages that much of what we've read, which is ostensibly some kind of edited manuscript of, what he's trying to get published, is fictionalized.
It's Will inventing Jack in You Shall Know Our Velocity.
Yes. Check out season 1, episode, I don't know, 5, 4, 3?
No, 3.
3. The entire character that the town was just like, oh, this weirdo outsider new kid did it. He never existed. One of the core main 4, the only girl in there, she didn't exist. One other person is a completely different person altogether. And it's done to, he says, to protect these people. But it's like, protect from what? It's...
Well, and he invented the girl because he didn't want Alex's life to be as lonely as it was. He wanted to fill out his life with other people because he was a person that was basically totally alone in the world.
And I think what's particularly damning about this is you think about real true crime stuff where the Jinx with Robert Durst and the Burp, and the filmmakers not sharing with the police that he confessed so that they could have the narrative moment, or you think of other things that don't Serial, the podcast, I felt
was one of the most irresponsible acts of journalism
and also wasn't narratively satisfying because she just ran out of story and she just
there are parts during that when she just starts accusing people of murder, and it's just because he wore parachute pants, and he dressed like Dennis Rodman. He wasn't acting like how you think a black guy should act in high school. What the fuck are you talking about, right. Sarah Koenig?
And I feel like the novelist in this book is just that's what people want. They want a satisfying thing with twists and good guys and bad guys and his friend is just the fuck is wrong with you?
Well, he's saying, what does he say? He says he's looking for that wow moment, and it's paid for the sheets on his bed and the thread count's pretty high.
Yep.
like he recognizes that what he's doing is not necessarily ethical, and so he tries to move away from that in a version of more personal ethics and sort of radical political belief that the people who did the murder were justified in their murder because they were enacting the castle doctrine, which is this sort of stand your ground law, that even though they were, I guess, homeless, are they homeless? They're
I think one kid in particular, because he even says like, oh, I'm going to go back to Sacramento. He's like, because if I tell them the truth of like, I don't know where I'm going to spend tonight, they're going to be depressed and nobody wants to be depressed.
But is that the fictional version of it?
Yeah.
Okay. But the real version, in the real version,
at least one of them,
they're also indigenous. And so like, he's saying like, look, they didn't have a home, but this was their home. They may not have owned it, but like by all other terms, they lived there. It was the four walls that made them feel safe.
They literally made it their own.
They made it their own. And like, just because you're a landlord and because you hold the deed to a place, that doesn't make it your home. And would the world have been any worse if they had just let it go and let these kids have the place?
Right. There's a 2-season show on Netflix that I hope comes back, but I feel like it's gone. But like American Vandal, which is a mockumentary, fictionalized version of true crime.
Okay. Where are we going with this?
I think everybody loves the first season because it's really funny and like the drawing the dicks or whatever. But I feel like the second season was so satisfying because it's like it's the exact itch of a true crime with the setup and the payoff and like everything. I think it's beautifully told.
Yeah.
And I think
it's less funny is why people.
I think
don't
it's
like
less
it
funny,
as
but I
much.
think it's better. I think it's in
I
every
agree.
way it's better. But I think why it works is because it's fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And our human brains are wired to like want to seek closure, right? But like life is messy. And so if you just tell this story about these like 3 homeless kids who became 3 or 2 homeless adults or whatever, and like one of them died and one you can't find one or whatever, like that's depressing. People don't want that. It's just like, oh no, it was this outsider kid and these were the band of 4. It was like Stand By Me or whatever. It's just like, what is going on here, right? So I understand where he's coming from, that like wanting good guys and bad guys and closure and justice. That's not how things go. Like, it's just these 2 people were murdered by someone.
Yeah.
It sucks, but like,
and it's about, narrative and how all narrative has its own bias by what stories you choose to tell and whose perspective you choose to tell them from.
Yep.
And what details you include, what details you absent. There's all of these things make up popular consciousness of a story, and he has an opportunity to tell a truth that nobody would be interested in. And that could be of danger to Alex, who could be imprisoned and go to jail, which he doesn't want to do because politically he's on this guy's side.
right.
Yeah. Do you have any experience with true crime? Like, is there any like true crime that you've been particularly moved by or really enjoyed?
I really liked The Staircase.
Okay.
And then when I came back, because like that was, I think, like maybe the first one that like people, I don't know, like I wasn't there when it happened, but I was early on it.
Yeah.
And then it like got revived by like Discovery or ID or something, and like, because The Staircase, if you don't know, is about a guy who was accused of murdering his wife, and he's like, no, I was out by the pool, and there was an owl. Like there's this whole like owl theory and whatever.
Because there was like a little fiber or something by her head.
Yeah, or there's like a feather or whatever. Yeah. The whole thing is like this 10-hour setup of just like, oh, maybe he didn't. Like, it's the whole thing. Maybe he didn't. Like, it seems like overwhelming. Like yeah, the guy just killed his wife, but like maybe he didn't. And then it comes back for like 3 more hours after the fact, and they like show other stuff that they didn't show. She's like, oh no, the guy clearly did it. Like, it was very clear, but like there's this something like, because I think there's the fear also that like you don't want to be accused of something you didn't do, and just the reasonable doubt or whatever, right?
Yeah. Have you seen the episode of Always Sunny, the Dennis Reynolds making a murderer?
I think so.
Where they're like,
I mean, I've seen every episode.
It's structured exactly like a true crime documentary, and there's this idea that he killed his wife, who the one who's like wants to be a cat. They go through all these things making him look guilty, and then at the end of the episode, they're like, okay, well, we've got like 3 more hours of that we have to like fill out to make, a bunch more episodes. And he's like, but you have the security footage of her falling off of the roof. Like, that I'm not guilty because you have the security footage.
Right.
But yeah, it's like about the ways that we draw stories out to maximize dramatic tension.
What was that one that was on Netflix like 6 years ago that was huge?
As Making a Murderer, right?
Was that the guy and the uncle and his nephew?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where I watched it, I'm just like, this feels like irresponsible. And like, I don't know.
The worst is the West Memphis 3 documentaries. The 3 of those, the Paradise Lost documentaries, because very clearly Damien Eccles and Jesse Baldwin and the third kid, whose name I forget, even though I should remember because this is part of what we're talking about, clearly didn't do it. But in the second one, which is like a 3-hour-long documentary, they accuse this guy. This documentary is essentially like, but what if it was this guy? It really seems like it was this guy. They spend the whole documentary building up the fact that they think that it's this guy. And then the third documentary comes out and they're like, new information proves that it's not that guy. And it's like, so you just in the years between these two documentaries, like a whole bunch of people that saw that on HBO were on the internet talking about it and talking to each other and just going like, and that guy's a fucking murderer and he's walking free. And it's just like, that guy's not a murderer. He didn't do anything. He's not guilty.
Yeah, I feel like I get sucked into true crime when it becomes like when it becomes a cultural like movement, when everybody's talking about it. Like the summer that serial came out, and like I started listening to season 2, I'm like, this is terrible.
That was the Bo Bergdahl one, right?
The AWOL guy. Yeah. I was just like, this doesn't like you're not a good. And I don't like it for a number of reasons. I feel like it's exploitative.
Sure is.
I'd rather have narrative because I feel like, again, the closure thing or whatever, and I also just the ongoing where like the people who get rich, like the Nancy Grace of it all, where it's people go home and watch her for an hour or more every day, like with no new update. It's just like the news cycle. It's just like how.
And she has to find a new way to make it appealing to you and make it like seem like, her. I think Nancy Grace became super famous because of Casey Anthony, right?
I think so.
Yeah, which is like another thing where it's like, okay, like Casey Anthony has a story that is. I haven't read anything about Casey Anthony. I suspect that if we dug really deep and started really looking at Casey Anthony, she would become a sympathetic character.
Probably. Well, I think that's the same thing where you should practice more empathy because you never know what somebody is going through.
Of course, yeah. As far as true crime is concerned, like the classics of the genre, like In Cold Blood by Truman Capote is fantastic. Mm-hmm. Executioner's Song by Norman Mailer, fantastic. More recently, People Who Eat Darkness. I forget who wrote that, but that's a really, really compelling story. And I read when I was in Los Angeles, when I was like 23, I read The Night Stalker, the Philip Carlo book, which was really fascinating because there were a lot of people around me that had experienced Richard Ramirez in real time. And so they would see me reading that book and they would tell me their stories of what it was like to be in Los Angeles when that was happening. And like, that was really compelling to me. And I think that book does an interesting thing because it does make like Richard Ramirez was guilty, but it does a really good job of making you look at the legal process and things like that. And you look at a legal process, even with someone who's guilty, and you can think like, they're not being fair to him. This is not like how it should go.
Right.
They should be treating him better than they are. The system is still not working, even though it essentially, quote unquote, did its job.
Right.
There's still abuse of this system and people are not being treated well within it.
Yeah. And I think that like, I don't want to like be more okay with, but I think the distance of the separation of time allows for easier digestion. Like I love the movie Zodiac, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood about Charles Manson. Like I think stuff that happened in the 60s and 70s is no less horrific than stuff happens today. But I feel like you have the like separation of like whatever. You're not trying to react to things in real time and try to find answers and like amateur detectives and whatever. And like I'll Be Gone in the Dark, I read the book that Meredith Salinger wrote and didn't finish before her passing, and then like sort of amateur detectives and like the other people that she had recruited like solved that, and like that's awesome. But like I was also reading that, and like I knew, because I read it after I knew the story was going to be adapted or whatever, and like I think that, I mean, she solved the cold case essentially, but also it rose problems because she passed away. But I was just like, you're just going to put this out in the world unfinished. You're just like, here's the thing. Here's some theories. It's just
Yeah,
like,
well,
that
I think
still feels kind of like weirdly irresponsible.
right. Another thing about true crime that is irresponsible is that the people who are writing it are essentially not journalists, and they're also not police officers. And so, like, not like, I mean, journalists are hella corrupt, and you know how I feel about police officers, but like, they're not bound. They don't. It seems like they're not bound by anything. They can just write whatever they feel like writing.
Well, that becomes a key thing in the last like 10 pages about the corroboration, like
Right,
where
yeah,
his agent calls him and just like, can you verify any of this? He's just like, no, but like, do we need to, basically?
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, yeah, we do.
Well, because he's the stuff because he's inventing people.
Yeah.
He's not like, you know, I think there are ways that you can present something in a way that is still like would pass a
It's not names
check.
and likeness have been changed to protect the innocent. It's like Siraj did. It's like that guy didn't exist. Like you can't just make up like an Arabic name, like a Middle Eastern name.
That is a little problem that I had with the book, right? Which is that like he invents this minority character to deflect from I mean probably
but that Devil House takes place in the 80s,
right, and it's playing on stereotypes of the time
Yes.
to you know, to deflect from the white kids.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like we talked about in Secret History, where like there's the guy at the gas station.
That's true. Yeah.
The episode that just came out this past week. I hope you listened to it. Where it's just like, yeah, I don't know, like it was like, you know, the white kid, yeah, Bunny was there, and it was 3 Arab guys. It's like, wait, hold on, what? So not only are you lying to like get attention, but like you're also being like racist and like planting the seeds of racism in other people's minds.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily I didn't have a problem with that. I understood why.
No, I don't. Yeah, it's something worth thinking about. And when I was reading it, I was just like, oh, that seems like something that would happen at the time in Milpitas, California. Which is another thing that we should talk about is the River's Edge, right? Like,
so these are two towns that apparently Darnielle grew up in.
Milpitas, really?
Milpitas and San Luis Obispo.
I know San Luis Obispo, yeah, because
these are two towns. The wiki for this is very short. It's like 2 sentences. It's one about like what it's about, and it's like just a true crime writer, blah blah blah. It's based on where Darnielle grew up, and also like the reception to it is pretty positive. But like,
it's interesting though. The putting it in Milpitas is interesting because you get what I'm presuming is true about like how that town reacted to River's Edge, which is they were all just like, fuck this. That's not us. That's not what we're like. That's not what happened. That's not what those kids were like. That's not what happened.
But there's the interesting element to it, which I'm sure it's happened somewhere, where there's this national media attention, it becomes a movie, and like just as they're like, all right, we can finally kind of sort of maybe start to move on with our lives, it happens again. And that's why like he writes about like everybody's just like, sweep this under the fucking rug. We're not going to accuse anybody. We're just going to like nothing, no stories, nothing. We can't let this happen again.
Yeah, it's like if there were another school shooting in Columbine, they would just be like, what? How?
Right. Yeah. Maybe Meg's email will inspire some thought. We have an email address, lottery@cageclub.me. Our reader, Meg, wrote in her reaction to Devil House.
What's the length of this email?
Medium long.
Because she can go both ways, you know. Sometimes we get 15 pages of email, and sometimes it's like 3 sentences saying that college novel was boring.
I will tell you, sorry Blake, that it ends the classic Meg, all in all, blah 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 blah.
Classic egg.
The TLDR.
Sunny side up. Classic egg.
It's kind of incredible, says Egg, how much of a turn this book took in the last 3 pages. I'd read up to the last chapter yesterday, and I would have described my interest in this book as purely academic. It does feel like we're giving her homework every single week.
We are, and I'm fine with that. She's like being a student. She, like you, is a nerd.
It was a condemnation of the true crime genre. Check.
Okay. Check.
And did a lot of work with perspective and narrator, but up until the last 3 or so pages, I didn't find it beautiful or moving. I mean, it's still a condemnation of true crime, and the idea of true crime genre being a type of voyeurism, but the fact that the reveal, quote-unquote reveal, at the end is done with a switch in character for the first time, something that could feasibly be said in workshopping circles to be a, quote, mistake, was very moving. Is that really the first time we shift perspective in the characters, or no? It feels like a lot of the back half is kind of slightly askew.
Well, because you get Jana's, I mean, the perspective is Jana's letter, but it's the first time that an I character is like where it's clearly someone other than Gage narrating.
Yes, because like the second chapter, White Witch is told to you. You were the type of person who did this. You went to the grocery store to do this.
Right.
The last 3 pages where you go from, quote, what the fuck to everything falling into place in a satisfying and sensitive way were very effective. I thought I was going to have to ask Bobby what the point of that weird medieval section was, but it came together so nicely. The condemnation of true crime feels a little severe at first, with Gage saying that Gage being the writer, saying that he's not going to tell the story, but by the last page, the reader understands his perspective completely. I loved how the reader thinks that the lesson Gage took from Jesse's mom's letter was to not lead the writer to explicitly state what they think happened, but in actuality, it leads him to write a fiction on what his publishing house wants to read so he can protect the people who need protecting. I think the, quote, friend was going to turn out to be Siraj. I'm kind of glad that we didn't know anything about the last narrator. It seems to respect the character's privacy.
Yeah, that's true. I also think that the general lack of conflict in its conclusion, because it like defies narrative expectations.
Which you love.
Well, I think Darnielle does that in his other books as well,
yeah.
Right? Like Universal Harvester turns into something very, very different than what you initially expected to be.
Universal Harvester is about a video store with like menacing sort of like faces of death shit spliced into VHS tapes, and then it becomes not that at all.
Yeah, a book that's like kind of about moms. And like, yeah,
it rules.
Yeah, and then Wolf and White Van is the same way, which is like there's this horrific act of violence that happens off page, and then the book walks you through, and you never really come to that act of violence again. The tension maintains. There's no like, you're never satisfied with what happens within it.
Yeah.
I think in this book, we kind of have more of an ending than those other books, but it still like is doing things that are, it doesn't follow like the branching path of a normal novel.
Well, it's almost like an anti-ending because the book starts with this, we're following this guy buying a house to move in to write a novel, and the novel, the Devil House, not his novel, but the novel we're reading ends with him not publishing the novel. So it's like, instead of like the gratifying, like he went to a place, he did a thing, he finished the thing, it's just like, he's not going to do the thing. Or maybe he will.
And well, you also never get that moment, right? Which in True Detective would be the moment of the guy in his underwear wearing the gas mask walking across the field.
Benny Ledoux.
I think it's Reggie Ledoux.
Reggie fucking Ledoux.
Sorry, Joey.
So you're a nerd. You're a TV nerd.
God
damn it.
I'm not a nerd.
Benny Ledoux is a terrible name. Reggie Ledoux, much better name.
But you like are kind of expecting, because you learn that this guy and the buyer and the slumlord are murdered with a sword.
Yeah.
In this like epically crafted room filled with a pornography art installation that invokes Satan and like an avenging angel. And so like you expect this like avenging angel type to emerge from sort of like the womb of this art installation with the sword and fucking kill both of them. And you're denied that moment. You're denied the satisfaction of that moment, largely because the satisfaction of that moment is the voyeuristic thing that makes true crime a little bit evil.
Right. And also, Gage, I don't know, knows what happened. So we don't get to know the ending because he doesn't know the ending.
Right. And in that sense, his ethics are kind of pure, because he's like very much like the method actor equivalent of a true crime writer. Like he tries to recreate the space and everything like that.
Egg says, as I was reading this, there were a lot of threads or various notes I was planning on including, but I feel like most of that melts away because of how the book ends. For example, I tried to keep track of when characters were brought up or introduced because it seemed important, but after finishing the book, those initial mentions seem to serve almost as a stream of consciousness injection. Gage needs to keep the illusion of the story alive, and the only way that it could keep going the way the publishers thought it would go would be if there's another player introduced. Seth's introduction seems abrupt. Quote, it has to be Seth. Almost like Seth's a character who was talked about before and is getting reintroduced. If Gage needs to inject the next, quote, clue to move the fiction forward, it fits that it would happen unnaturally in a way that the reader will remember once they find out that Seth doesn't or didn't exist as they thought he did.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing I want to mention is that I found it interesting that the section from Jesse's mom's POV evoked more feelings of guilt than the section about the actual villain of the story. which I think is we talked about earlier.
Well, yeah, I don't. Villain is such a nebular word there.
Yeah, who was the villain in that? We don't know.
Well, remember
maybe Jean.
I mean, there's the quote from very early on in the book that says there are no villains in a true crime story. There's the heroes and there's the hero and his victims, which is a fucking evil thing to say, kind of, but also like not, because part of what this story is doing is it is eliminating villains, except for landlords who are villains, right? J.P. Perdone, property is theft.
The closer you get to the past, the less believable this particular scene. I like that quote early on. Like, not that Jesse's mom was guilty of anything, but that she felt more guilt than, quote, the White Witch did. It also subtly connected back to the quote at the beginning of the book, there aren't any villains in a true crime book. There's the hero and there's his victims. The reader feels a sense of guilt as well, because the perspective of the initial portion of the White Witch definitely adheres to that maxim. All in all, that concludes. A good book, and I'm glad to have read it.
All right. Yeah, I think it's a... you asked me much earlier which of these was my favorite, which of the darnielle books was my favorite, and I didn't answer. I've read Wolf and White Van more times because I taught Wolf and White Van. Yep. I think that's my favorite. Universal Harvester, I have a real soft spot for, because while I am not a nerd, I am a mama's boy. So like I do have like that does touch me in ways that these other books don't. So the answer is that I don't know. I think maybe Wolf and White Van, but I would put Universal Harvester in this one on equal level. I think this is probably the most technically accomplished of his books.
I feel like, to sort of pivot into our next thing, I didn't think of casting for this at all.
I didn't either. Wow.
But I think this is probably the most easily adaptable of his three.
Yeah, maybe.
Because I feel like Wolf and White Van is tough. It's tough to do, I think, in an engaging way. I think that works better as a novel.
Well, also, it'd be hard to do because you have...
so much that's just like a guy in a room.
And your main character is a mutilated face that is hard to put on screen and have it not be something that is manipulative or exploitative or, that's hard to do.
Like, I always, growing up, loved Invisible Monsters, but like most of that is just from the perspective of a woman who blows her face off with a shotgun. Is that a spoiler? Maybe it is.
I don't think she blows her face off with a shotgun either. I think a can of hairspray explodes in a garbage can and it hits her in the face.
Maybe I should I'm not going to reread that book.
You could reread that book in 2 hours, probably.
Probably. I reread Fight Club years ago in 2 hours. Yeah. So, but it's just like, how do you you can't have it's tough to have a mutilated character.
Well, there's in the most interesting of those is the guy in Under the Skin, the Michael Faber novels, and Jonathan Glazer.
I forgot that was a novel. Yeah,
Jonathan Glazer movie with Scarlett Johansson, because they hired a guy who has I forget what the disease is called, but he has deformities, and it is like an opportunity to give people roles and have them. You can create empathy,
sure,
in that way, showing like, hey, these are real people that have these things going on with them, and also get those people a fucking payday. Yep,
I agree. I think Universal Harvester would be fairly easy to adapt, but I think it's also tough. Like, I think this also goes in line with the like Spring Breakers, Fight Club, making a movie for a group of people that you're taking to task.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
I think you would be like the must-see true crime, blah, blah, blah. And then like they all leave like, why do I feel bad?
Yeah. It's like, yeah. You are complicit in the creation of this art that exploits victims.
I feel like this is also probably his longest. Like, aren't his other two novels like 200-ish pages? Like, they're both shorter than this. This is
I would say.
Because I think when this came out, I'm like, oh, you want to read? Like, we can do this next week. You're like, I can't read that book. I'm like, how long? And I'm like, oh, yeah, it's kind of lengthy.
Also, because I'm aware that the
content.
I'm aware that his books read slow for me.
Oh, okay.
Which is not a complaint. I like when books read slow.
Yeah. I have a tendency when reading stuff that as I get toward the end, I want to race to the end because I'm like excited and I want to be like, see how it winds up. I'm sort of glad. I mean, I probably did that here too because I probably always do that. But like, I think if you like speed read the last few pages and miss key details, I can't imagine what you think of the ending.
Right. Yeah. You're just like, you didn't read the last 3 pages. I just skimmed them, and then it's just like, you come to the conversation with a complete wrong idea about everything that happened in the book.
Yeah. Because I read it and I'm just like, did that really say what I think it said?
It wraps up remarkably quickly in at the very end.
Well, that's not that seems to happen. That's not the first time on this podcast that this happened. I feel like there's been a couple times where it's like, and I'm trying to think of the example where it's just like, out of nowhere, just like, oh yeah, in the last like 2 pages, like it's a whole new thing.
Yeah, like when Lee in prep brings in a shotgun and just shotguns Martha and
birds ate her face.
And what's her name? Did you watch Preacher?
Yeah, I know Ass Face.
So that character is in that show?
Yes.
Okay, because I know he's in the comic book, and
I've seen how he looks in the comic. He does not look like that in the show.
Okay, so he's clearly based on the kid from Dream Deceivers who shot himself allegedly over a Judas Priest record, which is sort of what the Wolf and White Van stuff is based on, or feels like it's based on. I feel comfortable saying that it's like inspired by.
And also that Mr. Show sketch about Titanica, and the kid jumps in the vat of acid because they told him to.
Well, I think that's based on the Judas Priest thing as well.
I'm looking back at the books we did. Open City kind of has like a star.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
If the last 2 pages, you're like, hold on, wait, what happened?
Yeah, for sure.
Giles Goat Boy, sort of, where it's like 700 pages. Yeah.
Who knows what happened in Giles Goat Boy?
Loner, not quite, but Loner has a distinct twist toward the end. But I knew that we had talked about it at some point. But yeah, it's like you missed that thing in Open City. We're just like, oh, so he was a rapist.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Right. Yeah, this is very abrupt. Yeah, I could see it being made into a film. I wonder if any of his stuff. I'm sure it's been optioned. I'm sure his stuff has been optioned. At least Wolf and White Van has been.
Because he's also, again, I mentioned sort of like vaguely before, but like he's the lead. He's a singer-songwriter frontman for the Mountain Goats. So like
which is a band that people live and die by. They're a band whose fans are fairly rabid in the same way that like Neutral Milk Hotel fans are, or Phoebe Bridgers fans are, or
you just did Neutral Milk Hotel like you did NYPD Blue.
Yeah, that's how it's said.
That's a future reference.
That's how it's said. Neutral Milk Hotel. And as I always tell Jeff Mangum, if your milk hotel is neutral in times of oppression, then it actually sides with the oppressors.
You know what I tell Jeff Mangum?
What?
Keep reading.
Oh, you motherfucker. I can't believe you slipped it on me like that.
As far as I can tell, neither of his books, other things have been optioned. At least they're not on the wiki.
Yeah, today's crime is a little B&E, baby.
I was living in a devil town. Didn't know it was a devil town. Oh Lord, it really brings me down about the devil town. And all my friends were vampires. Didn't know they were vampires. Turns out I was a vampire myself in the devil town. I was living in a devil town. Didn't know it was a devil town. Oh Lord, it really brings me down about the devil town.